So hi everyone. Thank you for joining us for a live webinar today. We'll be covering the bioeconomy's role in solving the climate crisis and how we can replace fossil fuels in our daily lives. My name is Cian Scheer, and I'm an undergraduate senior at the University of Washington, Seattle. I'm studying bioresource science and engineering, and I'm also a CAAFI Cohort 4 delegate. And I'll be hosting today. I'm joined by my two guests, Chris Tindal, the Assistant Director of the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, who will be presenting today on biofuels, and Bill Orts, Research Leader from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service, will be presenting for us today on bioproducts. So just to start, I wanted to set some housekeeping rules. Please make sure your microphone is muted during the presentation and hold your questions until the Q&A section at the end. The meeting is also being recorded for posting at a later time. So the plan for today is I'll give a quick overview of what CAAFI is. This presentation is essentially like a final project for the program that I was involved in. And then I'll be telling you about the goal of the event. I'll be giving you an introduction to climate change and what the bioeconomy is. Then Bill and Chris will give presentations on bioproducts and biofuels respectively. And then we'll end with a Q&A. So let me tell you about CAAFI using the 3 W's. What, who, and why is CAAFI? CAAFI is the Consortium for Advanced Bioeconomy Leadership Education, and it's a workforce development project funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and directed by Ohio State University. It's composed of student delegates ranging from undergraduates to graduate students, mentors from both industry and academia, and industry collaborators, which is how I met Chris and Bill. The goal of CAAFI is to provide students with experience to enter the bioeconomy workforce and to create a network involving universities, industries, and government agencies whose efforts combine to make one stronger effort, which is why we're called CAAFI. So the goal today is to provide an overview of the bioeconomy and to answer the question, how can the bioeconomy help combat climate change? The bioeconomy has a multitude of positive effects on society, having to deal with the management of natural resources, public health, energy security, sustainable production, economic and social development, and food security. But today we'll be focusing on how it can help the environment. So climate change is defined as the long-term effects on or shifts in temperature and weather patterns globally. The impact of humans on the global climate has been severe and compounding since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels and the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is the way in which heat is trapped close to the Earth's surface by greenhouse gases. For example, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased by 25% since 1958 and 40% since the Industrial Revolution. It is necessary to take action to stabilize CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere in order to combat this problem. As you can see in my diagram on the bottom right, carbon dioxide takes up the largest percent of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's largely produced by the fossil fuel industry as well as just industrial processes. There's also some emitted by forestry and other land use. Methane is produced from agricultural, waste management, and energy use, and nitrous oxide also comes from industrial processes and fossil fuel combustion, as well as fertilizer use in agriculture. F-gases stands for fluorinated gases and also comes from industrial processes as well as like refrigeration. Some effects of climate change not only include rising temperatures, but also include increasingly severe storms, increased drought, rising sea levels, loss of species, and more. Here's a trend showing the rise in temperatures since the 1880s. And the question I'd like to answer for you is, how does the bioeconomy help combat this challenge? Well, first we have to cover exactly what the bioeconomy is. As per the Department of Energy's definition, the bioeconomy is the global industrial transition of sustainably utilizing renewable biomass resources and energy, intermediate and final products for economic, environmental, social, and natural security benefits. Another way to put that is as a process. The inputs being things like agricultural resources or agricultural residues like wheat straw and corn stover, woody residues like trees and lumber, gaseous resources, even those such as waste CO2 from industrial processes, municipal solid waste and biomass we can get from landfills, and algae and wet resources. Through conversion or manufacturing processes, we can get high volume essential outputs like fuel, electricity, and heating, or we can get low volume, high value outputs like chemicals, animal feed, and bioproducts. And so starting off with Bill, we'll be talking about bioproducts, and then we'll move into a section where Chris can tell us about biofuels. So I'll be passing it off to Bill now.
All right, thank you for that introduction. Let me go to share screen and make that big. I hope you're seeing Western Regional Research Center. So I am Bill Orts, research leader for bioproducts at the USDA labs, which is just down the hill from UC Berkeley. There's our center. There is UC Berkeley back in the background. So if you ever get to Berkeley, we're officially called Albany, which is just a little subset of Berkeley. If you get there, invite yourself over and come join us, please. Bioproducts and the bioeconomy is what I'm going to be talking about. And my favorite quote from Ronald Reagan, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. I'm not sure the Iron Giant helped us out much. Kent Mansley works for the government. But I like to say I'm from the government and we're here to help with the USDA. And that's been our mission, which is basically to try to prove that you can make money in the bioeconomy. All right, you can do it. This is going to be my overview, but some of the terms we're going to use today is the discussion of new carbons and old carbons. All right, and I love this kind of graphic because old carbons, fossil fuels. Now remember, we've had a pretty good lifestyle for the last 130 years, burning coal and petroleum products and making plastics. I mean, probably half of what you're wearing is a synthetic, although it looks pretty evil in this diagram. But before 130 years ago, we were the bioeconomy, right? There was no pumping fossil fuels and old carbons from underground. We basically dealt with wood and trees and crops, all right? So the bioeconomy is not necessarily something new. It's really going back to the future. But here this graphic says you can make money and have sunshine and flowers if you go back to the bioeconomy. So in the way of the overview, bioeconomy is often called the circular economy, and we're going to have a lot of circles occasionally talking about how we recycle and come back around. And one waste from one process can be the feedstock for the next process. So we often use words like carbon neutral, greenhouse gas reduction, zero waste. I'm going to briefly mention bioenergy because it's the driver behind us, but I know Chris will do a better job of really carrying that through. Mostly it's been corn ethanol up till now. At least 85% of the bioenergy has been corn ethanol. Mention that briefly. And then we build off that. And then what are our drivers? What are our examples? How has the government helped some of these examples? And and then open it up for discussion. All right, there's my review. Why corn ethanol? All right, a big part of corn ethanol is because we know how to make vodka. We know how to turn corn into high fructose corn syrup. From high fructose corn syrup, we can easily ferment to a grain liquor that we can distill into fuel ethanol, right? And pretty well the industry uses 40–45% of our corn supply to make about 10 to 15%. It's about 12% of our gasoline supply. So it's really, ethanol is in our fuel. It really works more as an additive to improve your octane levels as an oxygenate, and kind of really isn't the fuel yet. All right, so there's where corn ethanol is. Back to the future. Ford cars were really made to run on alcohol first. Ford was debating whether to go between electricity, she talked about Tesla, or ethanol. And then we started pumping oil from underground, and that was the end of the bioeconomy and start of what we know now. All right, coal and petroleum and big supply chains meant we could have a pretty good lifestyle living on fossil fuels. I am going to also introduce this idea of carbon intensity. So we're going to get a little deep for a second. Carbon intensity is a measure of how much greenhouse gases are produced by a process. So we have a bioprocess, say we are making corn ethanol or gasoline, and you put out so much greenhouse gases. The measurement we like to use for greenhouse gases is equivalent of CO2 emitted, all right? And so the folks who came up with carbon intensity said that this theoretical gallon of gasoline would put out so much CO2 equivalents, and we will normalize that at 100. Now, by the time this graph came along, this table came along about 10 years ago, even gasoline hadn't hit that normalization of 100. But okay, your hypothetical gallon of gasoline will put out so much CO2, we will normalize it to 100. But by the time this thing came out, our gasoline was even more local than it used to be. We weren't getting it from, Saudi Arabia or whatever. Okay, so gasoline has a carbon intensity of 95, and the first corn ethanol plants had a carbon intensity of 85 or 80 or so. And we're like, wait, we went all through this, we changed our feedstocks, and it's only 85% as good as a typical gallon of gasoline. And what that got us thinking is, you have to think of the whole infrastructure, the whole plan. When you make corn ethanol, where did you get your fertilizer? How did you get your corn to your plant? What kind of electricity or energy steam did you use in your plant? All right. Now this is purposely 10 years old because now they've worked on this. The infrastructure is there. Corn ethanol is probably down at about 50. All right, carbon intensity of 50. It's about 50% with improvements. And then this is something I'll get to later. If you actually use things like landfills and waste treatment and manure sites, you can get carbon intensity down near zero. So it's there. You can get corn ethanol down under 50%, 50. You can get, if you're using natural gas from, say, landfill or other things, you can get it down to 10 and under. All right. There is a circular economy related to synthetic plastics. I put it up there. We're going to look at a few circles in the next 10 minutes or so. You got your feedstocks from fossil fuels, pretty picture there. You made your materials. And really what happened, what changed the bioeconomy is the fact that chemistry got good. You could make fuels and plastics that were better than what we were used to, better than cotton, all right? Now, the idea behind the circular economy of plastic is you were supposed to collect your plastics. Somebody's going to come pick them up. They're going to recycle them, except they really don't recycle very well. You're going to collect them in your blue bin, and you're going to recycle them into something else. And you're going to make plastic products again. And you're going to do that over and over. And does it work? And the answer is it really, really doesn't work. At best, plastic bottles, we get around 25% recycling rate. For polystyrene, those styrene beads, it's near zero, all right? So polystyrene, polyethylene plastic bags, shopping bags is about 10% recycle, all right? So as much as we'd like to think there's a circular economy around the plastics world, it's not quite there. especially after Asian countries stopped taking our recycled plastics about 3 years ago. Recycling, there's no market for recycled plastics. So let's hold that off for a second. If you could make it biomass derived, back to the circular economy, the bioeconomy, this way, most of them are biodegradable, most of them are sustainable. Then instead, if you can make a biodegradable plastic, you would pick it up in the brown bin instead of your blue bin. And you don't necessarily recycle, you compost it, it goes back to basic materials and you can make bioplastics. Okay, circular economy in a picture, nice circles. The drivers towards sustainable plastics. All right, we've worked on all of these. We're US Department of Agriculture. So the first reason we did it is to add value to the rural economy, optimizing use of waste streams, add value, help the farmers make money. Second reason, and some of it's mandate, you have to reduce the, increase the compostability of things and reduce litter, all right? Reduce litter, prevent microplastics. This is a big driver in Europe. Some of it is greenhouse gas reduction and reductions in ocean plastics. There's actually a treaty put out called the Marpol Treaty that basically said anything that goes on a ship must be degradable, all right? And then California has landfill and recycling mandates. Most of the other states are following through. And then in Europe, a big driver is greenhouse gas reduction. But the best driver for a biomaterial is to create the best product at the best price, all right? These other ones are nice, but it's best to just make a biomaterial that is the best that you can buy for the money. Can we imagine a world where nature provides our materials and biomaterials where they are better? All right. We don't have to imagine much. We already have them. When you have a piece of paper, it's the best biomaterial. It's already part of the bioeconomy. Wood, you can barely build a building without seeing wood in there. All right. Paper, cotton, silk, wool, leather, linen, the list goes on. That's all part of our bioeconomy. So what really happened over the last 100 years or so is the chemists got good at using waste products from the petrochemical industry and making materials that were a bit better than this, all right? Our supply chains got bigger. Instead of getting a local supply of wood or even a semi-local supply of paper, we can have an international supply chain, get your petrochemical materials worldwide, and we like those materials, like those lightweight plastic materials, more than we like cotton or paper for certain applications, packaging and otherwise. All right, we're with the government. This is some of the things we've worked on. One of the drivers is really to notice that every crop we produce a lot more biomass than the actual crop that we use. Right down the line, corn, wheat, everything you make, almond trees, you know, there's a lot of biomass and we generally just eat the seeds or the fruit, all right? Wheat's one of the higher ones where we roughly use about 20 to 25% of the wheat ends up in that seed, ends up in our bread. Corn is about 18% of the corn stalk, the rest is stover. We barely use the rest. So there is an opportunity to try to use the rest of the crop for something better. All right, World Centric came to us and said, we think there's a market for making a whole bunch of reusable, recyclable materials where we don't use trees, we use wheat straw and rice straw. And they had us on hello. They moved into our pilot plant. We helped World Centric make these plates out of wheat straw. Like I said, they had us on hello. So, you know, we're with the government, we're here to help. These were developed in our pilot plant. It's kind of exciting. It's really the same pulping process you would use for any paper. You just take the wheat straw. The bug in that is that trees, you get a lot more biomass in lumber per acre than wheat straw. The infrastructure is not there really to pick up wheat straw and get it to your factories. You know, the country's really big and you have to drive a truckload of wheat straw, which is a truckload of feathers, to your plant. All right, so that's our infrastructure issue there. The next thing we worked on with them, now remember I talked about ethanol. All right, one of the big things about ethanol, if you notice the cycle here, but we're going to work our way around the cycle. You start with cornstarch. when we do corn ethanol, we are very good at taking cornstarch, hitting it with acids at temperature, and making high fructose corn syrup. We can do that. We can do that in our sleep. Now, from there, we can take those sugars and we can ferment them to ethanol or a whole bunch of other things. And Cargill said we can ferment them to lactic acid really easily. All right, you can ferment them with vinegar, ammonias, other things. Once you have lactic acid, what Cargill did is say, well, if you put two of them together like this, you make this dilactide. They want to fall apart so easily. All right, you got two of them like this. As soon as you get two of them together, they fall apart and they want to join their neighbors. So if you can produce lactic acid and then you get to this dilactide, you can make polylactic acid. And Cargill started this in the early 90s and built a whole industry about polylactic acid. What's really interesting about it is there's a whole bunch of enzymes out in nature that will break this down to lactic acid and back to sugars. So this is a true cycle in the bioeconomy. You can see it out there, PLA, you can see cups and bottles, and we've been working with the industry. And again, World Centric and us made these degradable forks and other things. We made a tray that looks like styrofoam with a company called Coriomat. So if you see World Centric Coriomat, know that it's USDA in the background, trying to turn what is essentially corn sugar, fermented into lactic acid, made into polylactic acid, made into a degradable, fully compostable fork or utensil, tray, cups, and bottles. All right, going to change gears a little bit. This is a project that we call zero waste agriculture. It's adding as much value, trying to get everything out but the oink from every product we can west of the Rockies. All right, so we've been working with the almond trees. If you learn nothing else from my talk today, what you need to learn is that an almond is closer to a peach than anything else you've eaten. And you go, well, what are we talking about? All right, almonds grow on trees. They're direct cousins of peaches and apricots. And all we ever eat is the kernel inside that shell, inside that fruit. So let me start again. They grow on trees and they have a fruit that does essentially dry out just before ripening that is very similar to an apricot or a peach, high in sugars. Then inside is a seed with a shell, and then inside we eat the kernel. All right, that's a lot of biomass. That's a lot of excess energy. Fortunately, cows love to eat that fruit. All right, there's a pile of almond hulls, which is the fruit. They're just as good as apricot. They're a little bitter in taste. So the happy cows of California happily eat almond co-products. They love almond hulls. Right, that's good news. Now, what do we do with the shells? Nothing right now. There's been a point where they used to get about $20 a ton as bedding for cattle, but the cattle industry is kind of flat and the almond industry has been growing at about 8 to 10% a year. So eventually half of the almond shells are going off to landfills. That's killing us. So we've been working with the almond industry to add as much value to those shells as possible. We pulp them like the paper I just talked about. But this team right here, first thing we did is we tried to make them into charcoal. And we're going to feed, called it biocoal. We're going to feed utility plants. Not a bad idea, not ideal. But when we made them into charcoal, okay, the production of charcoal is called torrefaction. And basically you burn things with style. You burn things not at temperatures called gasification or pyrolysis, but at roughly 200 to 300 Celsius. You limit the oxygen and you essentially make charcoal out of it, or carbon black. That's another name. All right, densifies it and you get black powder out of it. That black powder we thought was going to be a filler that sort of looks like carbon black, but when we started to add it to recycled plastics, it's better to be lucky than to be good. We took polypropylene that had been recycled, we torrefied almond shells and added it at about 15%. And we thought we would just get an inert filler. What is the heat distortion temperature? Heat distortion temperature is basically a measure of heat stability in that plastic. You take a piece of plastic and you put a load on it and then you heat it. And when it gives away like a limp piece of chewing gum, right? When you finally, that's the heat distortion temperature or the heat deflection temperature. Recycled polypropylene has a heat deflection temperature of, let's call it 138 Celsius. If you add torrefied almond shells, which is basically carbon black from almond shells or carbon black from other biomass, it increases the heat stability. That's really useful because it means you can use recycled polypropylene thinner and thinner and get heat stability. So things that might have melted in the sun, you get a little bit more heat stability. It also made them slightly stiffer. Now, why did we use this? Well, here's our feedstock right there. We got a $4 million grant from CalRecycle to basically take those big bales of potentially recyclable plastics that we used to try to send to Asia from Long Beach, but are piling up at our ports because we don't have a use for these recycled plastics. Notice they're kind of a blobby color, right? If you made a plastic out of that recycled bin there, that recycled bale, you get weird colors. It would be an ugly gray color. You add some carbon black, you can make them black, and we started to make these pallets out of them with about 15% almond shells. All right. Next thing, so that's potentially closing the loop. All right, we're excited about that project. Life has, so I'm going to change gears just a little bit. One of my pet peeves in life has several certainties. Death, that's probably a pet peeve. Taxes and garbage. All right, garbage will always be with us. I don't know, you go to Rome, the ruins are 20 feet below the modern city because we basically buried them in garbage and built over them. That's what we do. That's what society used to do before they had bulldozers. Garbage is always a nuisance. If you drop garbage on the side of the hill and wait for it to turn to methane, that's a sin. That's a greenhouse gas waiting to happen. So what we've been doing is working with the industry to upgrade garbage into something useful. One way to do that is through anaerobic digestion. So that was back at the Crazy Horse landfill. We take it over. We've made these systems to process the garbage with a digester and some pasteurization, and purposely create methane, but we capture it. Now, methane, if you think CO2 is bad, methane is 84 times as bad. So if you have a landfill or a wastewater treatment facility and you're not capturing the methane, you are a source of pollution. If you have a manure, dairy manure, poultry manure, anything, and you're not capturing the methane, you are a greenhouse gas emitter. Hate to say that ag is bad for the environment, but if you're not capturing your methane, ag is bad for the environment. All right. One study we did is compare the methane you can get off a garbage dump per ton of garbage versus ethanol. If you took ethanol, took all the cellulose out of it, you'd make about 70 gallons per metric ton of garbage. You can get about double that if you turn it into renewable natural gas. All right. So it's a better use of carbons to turn it into compressed natural gas. So you take your garbage, you run it through a digester, you make methane, you compress it, and you run your diesel trucks off of compressed natural gas that you just took off your landfill. That's one goal. And then a company called Mango Materials showed up at our door and said, you know, we're making methane from a landfill, and it looks like, you know, it's a pretty good use of carbon. And they showed up, these were grad students from Stanford, and said, we take methane, we feed it to bacteria, and we can make a plastic out of it. It's a small miracle, all right? And that plastic is totally sustainable and totally biodegradable and makes really good products. And then at the end of life, it can degrade back to methane and we can start all over again. We can send it to landfill. Here's what they showed us. Okay, there's the bacteria. You take away an important nutrient, you get these little granules in there. That granule is a polyester. And that there's a close-up of it. There's the molecular structure of this polyester called PHA, and that's what it processes into. You can make bottles, you can make sheets, and you can make textile fibers. So that's your garbage, your landfill waste, your methane from your landfill, and everything in ag can be digested. Almost every carbon can be digested into methane, right? So it's like falling off a log. You can turn anything into methane. And these are some of the sheets they're making with some companies such as Nike and REI and others. They also work with a company called Danimer to make these saran-like almost clear sheets that they're going to use for plastic film and body shop. All right. Another company called Full Cycle does almost the exact same thing that we work with, but instead of going to methane, they go to organic acids and make the same plastic. All right, about to wrap up. Bioeconomy, circular economy. Do we recycle? Do we compost? Does recycling and composting coexist? Where's the infrastructure in that, right? Who decides on the infrastructure? Well, we're hoping that, Cable can provide some folks that will help us with the policy on that, right? There are opportunities in the bioeconomy to create these circular loops, but we're gonna have to build an infrastructure and have policy that gets us there. So, my last little thing is we've got great technologies. Do we have the infrastructure to put those technologies in place? So we have the conversion technology. We know how to make the biofuels. We know how to collect biomass. We know how to run landfills. Can we put them all together and create these new biomaterials I've just kind of touched on? All right, can we pick up the rice straw and the wheat straw and turn them into plates? All right, and I do notice some of you are students in CARE. I put this slide up the last time I chatted with Cable. Some of the research possibilities and skill sets we look for are all over the map. Just about many of you in the biological sciences and engineering, environmental science. If you know DNA, you pretty well can go anywhere in biological sciences. Equipment, all right, there's a whole bunch of opportunities with our research units in optimization, scale up, field trials. Remote sensing and big data is a big area for us. And then carbon counting, life cycle analysis, and how that ties into policy is something that can be very exciting. All right, these are opportunities with the USDA. And then I'm going to undo that slide by saying, okay, when we hire people, yes, we'd love those skill sets, and we often get them at the PhD level, but everything short of that, no one gets you completely prepared for your career. So you don't always have the exact match for the skill set. So we look for other things like curiosity, tenacity, accountability, the ability to learn, right? And all of those intangibles and the ability to work with people and communicate. All right, I've been bragging about stuff that those folks work with us on, and this is the team that I have represented, and there's our mission statement in a picture. I can take questions now or questions later. If you have any questions specific and you want to tell offline, there's my email right there, bill.orts@usda.gov. And thank you for the organizers for pulling this together.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And if you don't mind, I think we'll hold questions until after Chris's at the end.
Sounds good.
Well, yeah, you're up.
All right, I gotta stop sharing, I bet.
That would help. Thank you very much. Bill, those are some really great slides. It's going to be hard to follow you, but I will do my darndest. All righty. So can you see the whole slide now? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I do want to thank Cian and Cable for inviting me here to be a part of this illustrious webinar. And I do think that there's a lot of good information here, and I don't mind sharing my slides. I'm sure that Cian will get this recording out on the web as well, and I'm sure it will go viral. So the picture there on the right side is back in March of 2016, and it was the first time that we actually had on a continuous basis sustainable aviation fuel going to a commercial airliner, in this case United Airlines, at Los Angeles Airport. So if anybody has flown through Los Angeles Airport anytime in the past 5, almost 6 years, you will have been flying on sustainable aviation fuel, some molecules. The reason I say that is because even though United is the one who caused that to happen and get the fuel there, at any airport, there is not a fuel tank just for United Airlines or just for American. They all come out of the same tanks. So United is the only one who can brag about it, but everybody is using it across the board. And that came from World Energy right there in Paramount, California. So anyway, that's sort of where we're starting. And I also want to give you a little bit of definitions. Even though we're talking about biofuels in general, we're talking about any kind of fuel from a sustainable source, from a renewable source. So it is truly a bioproduct, but in this case, it's a fuel. So certainly ethanol can be considered to be a biofuel, which it is. But in the case of what I'm going to be discussing, it's going to be renewable fuels. And renewable or sustainable is another way of looking at it. And it's basically coming from a renewable source, a sustainable source. And the nice thing about these renewable fuels is they are drop-in replacements. And so when I say drop-in replacements, they are not like an additive like ethanol is, but in some cases we can actually have it all in the tank of a plane, and it will fly just fine. So think of it this way: sustainable fuels, renewable fuels, instead of coming from dead dinosaurs, it's coming from all of those things that Bill talked about. You know, wheat straw in some cases, corn stover in some cases, municipal solid waste. And so we have a huge amount. Used cooking oil, there's a lot of different feedstocks that I'll go into, but this is sort of the definition. And so when I talk about, obviously, because I'm the assistant director for Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, I'll be talking more about aviation. But there's also, you know, the other side, and that's the renewable diesel side. And renewable diesel is different than biodiesel. Again, biodiesel is one that goes through a couple of different processes, and you have to make sure that you have the right types of engines. Whereas with renewable diesel, it can be just put into any of those diesel engines across the board, which is kind of a nice thing. Okay, so I know that we're certainly talking about climate change. We're talking about greenhouse gas emission reductions across the board. So there is a number of different goals that the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, CORSIA, has put into place. The first goal was we were trying to just become more efficient across the board, and we have actually achieved that now. So we now have some savings in greenhouse gas emissions that we've got. But for our second goal, we want to be carbon net growth from 2020 onward. And that was, you know, that's basically where, when we look back across the board, we want to make sure we are not increasing that across the board. But we want to have even then a 50% reduction from a baseline of 2005. We want to have that reduction across the board. So that's sort of where we are, and that's kind of how we're wanting to handle things across the board. So when you then look at, you know, the overall capacity, and again, we're just talking about here sustainable aviation fuel, our capacity forecast for production. You know, right now we're maybe about 70 million gallons of overall production capacity. And if you see there, by the end of 2025, we hope to have 1.8 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel production capacity. Now, there is a difference between the actual production and the actual capacity. So when I say capacity, it just means that those plants have the capacity to turn that into sustainable aviation fuel using the different feedstocks we talked about. But it also then is dependent upon if the airlines are going to buy them. Well, we do know that the airlines want to buy them, but they also have their shareholders that they have to contend with, and also the flying public. The flying public doesn't want to necessarily pay a little bit more. Sometimes they do pay a little bit more, but you know, right now the sustainable aviation fuel might be two times as much, maybe three times as much, but it's really no more than two times more. But it all does go back to the feedstock. So if you can actually have a low cost feedstock, then that makes it, maybe we'll be able to get sustainable aviation fuel at parity with traditional jet fuel across the board. So again, think about that 1.8 billion gallons by 2025. That seems like a huge number, but you'll see in a moment that that number is fairly small compared to the overall demand that we have out there across the board. Now, the Airlines for America, that's A4A, they have some commitments that they've done across the board, and we are building to a 3 billion gallon per year sustainable aviation fuel usage by the year 2030. And these were commitments as of March of 2021. But you can see there that in some cases they want to be net zero carbon, that's the NZC, by 2040, some by 2050. But across the board, we just want to have some reductions in carbon, and that's through the increased use of sustainable aviation fuels across the board. So when we look at the current supply and demand, remember that 1.8 billion gallons that I talked about, well, and that's globally, but when you see that our global actual consumption of jet fuel is 97 billion gallons, well, 1.8 billion gallons is going to be, maybe about 2% by 2025. So we still have a long ways to go. Within the United States, we consume about 26 billion gallons of jet fuel every year. But we do have some really very tremendous goals across the board too. So the current sustainable aviation fuel consumption, even though we have all that capacity, right now in the US, maybe it's about 5 million gallons, which is less than 1%, 0.1%. And that's a very, very small amount. And then globally, 25 million gallons per year of consumption. Based on that, when you look at the 97 billion gallons that we're using, again, less than 0.1% across the board. So we do have a long ways to go. So the demand within the United States and globally, when we look at it, there are about 5 million gallons per year of offtake agreements between the commercial airlines and business aviation and potential SAF producers, and that's globally. So that is very encouraging when we have these offtake agreements. And basically, the airlines have said, okay, when you're able to start producing that, then we will buy it from you. And that's a very, very good, very, very, very good for the market, because then those potential producers can then go to the bank and say, hey, I've got a guarantee income once I'm able to start producing that. Well, so when we look about the government, and the government is here to help you, as Bill was mentioning. In September of 2021, both USDA and Department of Energy and Department of Transportation announced this Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge. And that Grand Challenge is basically saying that we want to have within the United States 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel being produced per year by 2030. And then 35 billion gallons by the year 2050. Well, right now, as I mentioned, 26 billion is about what the US is doing. We project it by 2050 that we'll be up around 35 billion gallons of consumption. So basically what they're saying is we want to have 100% of consumption coming from sustainable aviation fuel by the year 2050. Essentially, when you do the math, we have to double our production every year from now until 2030 to meet that first Grand Challenge goal. So we have a long ways to go, but we certainly can get there. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how to do that. So we know from a progress from a technical standpoint, we do know that it is viable across the board. We know that we have a lot of different pathways. Right now, we have 7 that are approved. We have six that are in the pipeline. I'm sorry, 6 that are in process, and over 15 that are in the pipeline to get into the overall process through the American Society of Testing and Materials, ASTM International. They're the ones who are approving the jet fuels across the board. So when Bill was talking about the different feedstocks, in this case, our sustainable aviation fuel, again, it's not coming from dead dinosaurs. It's coming from oil lipids, used cooking oils. It's coming from sugars, not necessarily from sugar cane, not necessarily from corn or corn ethanol, but there are a lot of different sources that we can get from to get those sugars. So you see that there's a lot of different things that we can use. They're basically used in thermochemical and biochemical conversion processes across the board to produce these synthetic hydrocarbons. And then, we know too that right now, a lot of them are at a 50-50 blend, but there are some of the pathways that the military has actually tested at a 100% sustainable aviation fuel with no fossil jet fuel in the tank whatsoever, and things flew just fine. So we didn't have any problems whatsoever across the board. So when we look at the overall summary and we look at it across the board, one of the things I want to highlight when we're talking about climate change again, because we are using some of those bioproducts, we do have up to a 100% reduction in greenhouse gases, which is huge. And then also when Bill was talking about carbon intensity, there are some companies out there that are in process of being built, these biorefineries, and in some cases they have a negative carbon intensity score. And part of that reason is there's one that's going to be built or is being built in South Dakota, and they're using wind farms to provide the electricity for the plant itself. So they're not pulling electricity off of the grid. In one case out in California, any of the carbon that is emitted from this particular biorefinery, they're going to be sequestering that. So they will have a negative over 100 score with carbon intensity. And that's really huge across the board. So I guess what I'm saying is that, we, even though it seems like the numbers don't necessarily see that, if we have to double our production every year from now until 2030, are we going to be able to get there? Well, I will say that there is a huge amount of production that's hopefully being put into place. You could see there those numbers from 2021 all the way up to 2026. We are actually increasing the amount of production across the board, and that's a good thing. And then when you do look globally at all the different feedstocks that are there, yes, we do have, the sugarcane bagasse we can be using. Bill mentioned wheat straw and corn stover. There are some pathways and processes that are going to be using those as well. And Bill, you and I are going to need to talk afterwards because I have a company in mind that could possibly use those almond shells. So instead of them going to a landfill, we can probably do and use that across the board too. So sustainable aviation fuel is certainly a good thing, and it will be good for the environment across the board. And I do want to also mention one other thing that Bill said, and that's about the opportunities for jobs. Because of the huge amount of emphasis that is being placed on sustainable aviation fuel and renewable fuels in general, there will be many jobs being opened up across the board. And so, I certainly have a good network of people within the industry, and I know that Bill does as well too, with all those different companies that he talked about. So if anybody's looking for jobs, I know that they do exist, and they are available. And that's a huge thing. So, Cian, again, I really do appreciate being able to be a part of this. across the board. And that's my contact information. Please reach out to me, across the board, and I'll be glad to take any questions from you either via email or on the phone as well too. So Cian, thank you very much again. I'll turn it over to you for Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so now I'd just like to kick off a Q&A session. I'll share just a quick visual on how to use and where to find the raise hand button, or you can also shoot your question in the chat and we can either read it off directly or I can ask it aloud for you. I did have a question for Bill. I was wondering if you could speak for just a little bit on the Biopreferred program, what that is, and maybe where consumers might see that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So starting about 15 years ago, the federal government, actually they put it in the Farm Bill, might have been the 2010 Farm Bill, that said we might need to kickstart this industry. So let's give anything that's a bio-based material a kickstart and an advantage. And what the Biopreferred program is basically if you are using a bio-based material, and I'll define that in a second, but if you are doing that, you get to have a label from the USDA called the Biopreferred label, which might be a marketing advantage, and you get a huge advantage in all federal contracts. So now how big is that? You think of all the Army and Navy bases across the world and how many federal employees there are and federal cafeterias and all the embassies. It starts to be hundreds of thousands of people buying your stuff. About 8 years ago, Coca-Cola put out a thing called the plant bottle, where their PET bottle was from more sustainable sources. It got a Biopreferred label, and then every Army base and federal cafeteria had to buy Coke over Pepsi, right? So it can be big. So it's a Biopreferred, so you get it for the label. And what is a Biopreferred product? What is bio-based? It comes from counting how many new carbons instead of dead, thank you, Chris, dead dinosaurs, new carbons versus old carbons, all right? You can count that. New carbons are exposed to gamma rays and they have more C12, 13, 14s, whereas old carbons have relaxed back to stable carbons. So it's really like carbon dating. And you just do carbon dating on your product, and you can ask yourself whether it's mostly fossil fuels or new carbons that are up above the earth. If you have 35% new carbons, you're bio-based. That's the rules. And then you can get a Biopreferred label, and then you can get an advantage in all your federal contracts. There's only three. I don't give you a long-winded answer. There's only three advantages that the federal government gives for contract: small business, minority-owned, and Biopreferred. So it's an advantage.
Thank you, yeah. Another question, I was wondering if each of you could speak on, since, yeah, a lot of us are students, I think a lot of us would probably be curious what your professional background was and how you got to where you are working wise.
Sure, I'll start. So I guess I got involved in this when I was in the Navy in uniform. Actually, I spent 30 years in the Navy. 5 years in the active side, and then 25 years on the reserve side. And so I was a ship driver, and so I was a consumer of fuel. And so when I got off of active duty, I then started working for the Navy on the civilian side, working for the Navy Facilities Engineering Command on installation energy issues. And then when I worked my way up to DC, and then I got a job over in the Pentagon working for the energy side. And even though I'd already had my teeth cut, as it were, on the installation side, I said, I used to be an actual consumer. Let me work on the operational side. So that's when I became the director of operational energy for the Navy. And that was back in 2008. So I'm dating myself a bit, but that's where I really started working on the renewable fuels aspect. We had a very good Secretary of the Navy who supported us and came out with these huge goals in 2009. And if anybody has heard of the Great Green Fleet that the US Navy did, I was the main project leader for that. And so globally, you know, I certainly had a lot to do with all the different navies of the world accepting the use of these renewable fuels, both on the jet side and then on the diesel side as well. So I retired from that job in April of 2017, and that's when I started working for CAAFI. But I would say that I've always had a passion for being very passionate about energy and energy reductions. And the science speaks for itself that we need to do something to limit our carbon emissions across the board. And so that's kind of why I'm doing these kinds of things. And as Bill mentioned, you know, I do want to see a lot of people getting into this space. It is sustainable, but it's sustainable not necessarily from the biomaterials, but it's also from the resources. You know, at some point, Cian, I need to have a replacement for me. So get in line, and you know, we'll take your resume, and maybe we'll hire you into the CAAFI organization or somewhere else within the renewable fuels organization too. Anyway, that's where I came from. Bill?
And that Navy work is remarkably noteworthy from about 10, 12 years ago. So we've noticed. So let's see. I went to school in Canada to Queen's University is originally a mining school, and they're famous for creating oil engineers, right? So a lot of folks who go to Queen's University end up feeding the oil industry. And I was in third year, and they came out with a new program. It was going to be the Biochemical Engineering Alternative Energy Program in the 80s. What the heck is that? And so one of the first essays I wrote was about how peak oil was going to happen during my lifetime. And what peak oil means is we're going to run out of fossil fuels, the easy fossil fuels, or we're going to have to go to tertiary, you know, beyond, you know, shale oil by the 30s, you know, by about 2030. All right. And that was the main reason. So I switched over to the biochemical option and got a summer student position down at University of Toronto, where I thought we were going to make ethanol out of wood. And then the funding, you follow the money. And instead, they were making that plastic I talk about, PHP, polyhydroxybutyrate, out of carbon-5 sugars. So I was able to go down. Canada has co-op PhD thesis, master's thesis. So I was paid by industry and actually an employee. So first I was an employee of George Weston's Limited, which is a really big company in Canada. They paid for my master's to make food gums out of wood chips, and then by fermentation. And then I was an employee of Xerox, but at University of Toronto at the Xerox labs. And we were making that PHA plastics in collaboration with Zeneca and ICI. So it was an industrial PhD program in biochemical engineering with industry caring. So it was kind of unique. It was fun. Finished that, did a small stint in basic research at a nuclear reactor. We can talk about that at a different time, where it was a peacetime dividend. We tried to use nuclear energy to characterize biopolymers. It was run by the Department of Commerce at NIST, did that for about 5 years. And then USDA was looking for people to start a program in biomaterials. I applied, got the job, showed up at USDA in the mid 90s and never left because it's been one of my passions. So since we created a unit, I was the first research leader. We were the wheat grains processing unit, and we created the Bioproducts unit because I just put a proposal in for a new unit in around 2000. Been the research leader for that ever since. We grew from 4 people to 45. So I can go on and on about this. It's one of my passions, but I'll leave it there. We fortunately have been able to work with companies and keep their secrets. So we do know where some of the bodies are through this, the victories and the defeats. All right, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, so I'd like to open the floor if the audience has any questions as well.
I see one in the chat box, Ken, that Joel sent in. What can we do to get more people around us to get excited about the bioeconomy? So I'll answer that, then we'll send it over to Bill, and I see Gabriel has his hand raised too. So I think that honestly, from my perspective, Joel, is that we need to, it's all about education, it's all about training, it's all about believing in science. So I would say that if we are all be able to educate people about what the bioeconomy really is, educate them about biofuels, educate them about all the different bioproducts from all the different feedstocks that are around there. I think that will be one good step in the right direction. Get people to, yes, recycle, but more compost than anything else, I think, from where Bill was coming from, just because of the unfortunate small amount of recycling that is actually happening. But I think the more and more that we can do that, I think that's good. Bill, what's your thought?
Yeah, trust science and education. Get educated. Have an opinion on this. So attend workshops like this and start to understand that I am a true believer that we can invent our way to a very sustainable future. We have all the pieces. We just need the will and maybe the leadership to get there. Pieces are there. Starting with solar energy, wind energy, and then this biomass conversions. We can be flying jets in 10 or 15 years that are mostly from renewable feedstocks. You just need the will and enough incentive to do it. Our landfills are a source of carbons. They pay you to take them. There's no reason you should drop those carbons on the side of a hill and wait for them to turn to methane. You should use them to generate electricity. You could put a computer server center there that doesn't need a lot of people, and you can have a generator, and you should use all those carbons to get free electricity, and then you can get your Bitcoins next to a landfill, right? You can mine your Bitcoins. Point is, I believe we can do it. We need leadership that also believes we can do it. Trust your science and look for people that also trust it. We'll leave it there.
All right, Gabriel, I guess. Sorry, Ken, I don't mean to take away the moderation from you there, buddy.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Chris and Bill, and then another question just for Chris. So the first question is, you guys talked a little bit about infrastructure. So looking at all the steps of the process chain, where we need to really improve, since growing and harvesting the biomass up to delivering the products to the customers. And the other question for Chris, what is it going to take to scale production of jet fuel from biomass to get to those numbers that you were talking about? Thank you. And the talks were really good.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. So I'll answer that first question first, and then send it over to Bill, and then I'll take the second question. So as far as infrastructure and improvements that you're talking about, Gabriel, the nice thing about the sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel is that you don't have to change out any infrastructure. You can use the same piping systems to get the fuel to the plane, to the wing of the plane. So you don't have to have a separate tank. So that's good from that perspective. But I think, and Bill may be able to back me up on this, the big thing about getting the biomaterials out of the field, like the corn stover, like the sugarcane bagasse, like the wheat straw, a lot of times it's just left there in the field. Well, how do we aggregate that? How do we pick it up? How do you aggregate the used cooking oil that's around? certainly there are, because it is becoming a commodity, beef tallow, the renderings from a meat packing plant, they do have companies that are going around and collecting that and getting it to some of these renewable fuel producers, which is a good thing. But how do you get every single bit of bark and slash pine out of the forest when you're doing pine tree thinnings, for instance? That's a very labor-intensive process, and so sometimes the infrastructure is that we found that we're building some of these smaller facilities that can take that, let's say for a pine tree plantation, they take the thinnings from the pine trees, and they are able to consolidate that into either wood chips or sawdust or something like that is much more transportable than just putting a bunch of logs on the back of a truck, and then getting it to the facility that's going to then process that into a renewable fuel. So that's where some of the infrastructure improvements that we need across the board, Gabriel, is in that biomass collection, as it were. Bill?
Yeah, so I've been in this industry for lots of years, so I've seen, things come and go. Chris said something really important that we didn't necessarily entertain years ago: drop-in replacement. All right. So if you can actually get your product so that it really looks like the existing petroleum-based product, that's a huge part of the infrastructure as well. You don't need, one of the problems with corn ethanol, you can't use the same oil pipes as your gasoline pipes. You can't pipe it the same way. You have to truck it. That's actually a problem with it. So the more your infrastructure, so at the one end, you want drop-in replacement whenever you hear that. That's really good news. Use the existing infrastructure. Don't create a whole new beast just because you want to go green. That's up front. The other mistake we made 15 and 20 years ago is Department of Energy. We gave buckets of money to companies without them having the infrastructure to gather. So we were kind of asking for two miracles from them. You're going to create first of your kind technology to turn something into jet fuel or whatever the biofuel or bioproduct, but you're also going to build an infrastructure of supply chain and crop insurance and everything to feed it. Since then, there have been more companies interested in the supply chain, aggregators. They discovered that the same folks that might aggregate biomass to feed like dairy cows can also feed an ethanol plant, can also feed a plant like CAAFI would. So there's aggregators of biomass. That's a big part of the infrastructure. Second one is crop insurance for these new uses, like get crop insurance, especially new crops. Unfortunately, we live in a big country. These solutions, unfortunately, all right, these solutions are probably going to mean the supply chains get smaller, and you're going to have to think locally in smaller drives. So the petroleum industry, you don't know where your oil came. It could have come from Saudi Arabia, Russia, Mexico, all this, Singapore. It could have come from around the globe, and it would be the same pipe. We're going to have to kind of shrink our mindset and say, it only makes sense if the biomass goes less than 100 miles to a local regional supply. All right. And what we need is funding mechanisms to support what I said, all of that. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that totally, Bill. And so on to the next question, but I'm going to still sort of relate some of that, some of the other stuff that Bill was talking about as well, too. So if we're trying to get to scale production, what you were mentioning, Gabriel, yes, the feedstock consolidation is one of the big key drivers. And so to Bill's point, yes, we need to do some at smaller regions. And the reason for that is the feedstocks that are there. Yes, like I mentioned, you can't just put all these pine trees on the back of a truck and cart it 500 miles just to get to a biorefinery. You need to do that in a local area. So instead of always going to Saudi Arabia or South Texas to get your oil, why can't we be doing something in Georgia right now, where there is no oil fields, but LanzaJet is actually taking an old existing ethanol plant and turning it into an alcohol to jet fuel plant where we're going to get that fuel right there in Georgia and be able to take that to Atlanta or take it to Charleston, South Carolina, take it to some of those airports that are just around that particular area of where that is. And that makes a lot more sense then, because then we don't have to put everything into the Colonial Pipeline going up the East Coast, for instance. So I think the feedstock consolidation is one of the bigger things. And the other aspect of that feedstock is when I was mentioning to you the price parity and wanting to get to the traditional jet fuel price, fossil jet fuel price, when you think about any gallon of fuel, 80% of that price in that jet fuel comes from the feedstocks. Well, it's real easy to drill a hole in the ground and just suck it out of that ground because it's right there. But instead, we're trying to take 500 acres of a cornfield and get all the corn stover together and be able to turn that into jet fuel, sustainable aviation fuel. So that's part of it too, is that whole feedstock. I would want to say too, definitely want to highlight the policy issues. Policy issues are very, very key. Right now within Congress, the whole bill that's being held up, the Build Back Better campaign, a part of that has a climate change aspect to that in that bill. And there's a thing called the Sustainable Skies Act. So Google that and you'll be able to see that there are some people in Congress that are actually trying to put through a blender's tax credit that will help through this policy, will help some of those producers actually get some more credits and be able to be at parity with the diesel side. So right now, diesel is getting a lot more money when you're selling it in California. You're getting from the Renewable Fuel Standard, the RINs credits, Renewable Identification Numbers credits, and then they also have a low carbon fuel standard program out there in California. And so a lot of people, even if they're producing it I know of a company producing fuel in Louisiana, where they're carting it all the way over to California to sell because they can make more money at it. There is one company in Singapore that is actually taking beef tallow from Australia, taking it to Singapore. They're turning it in renewable diesel. They're shipping it all the way to California, and they're still making tons and tons of money, even with all that transport cost and all that carbon emissions from all those ships. So we definitely need to make sure that the policies are there. And then the other thing that Bill was mentioning is funding. We need to make sure we have the proper funding in place as well too. So I'll leave it at that, and we'll go to. I think we have some more questions that may have popped in.
Can I just add one point to that? There's an opportunity there. The petroleum industry is mostly coastal, right? When you think big, you bring in the petroleum all to, Long Beach and Newark, New Jersey and the South Texas coast and all of the synthesis of polymers and all of that, right? Pasadena, Texas. By going smaller and locally, you have the opportunity to build your economy nationwide, wherever the biomass happens to be. There's an opportunity there as well. You don't need to come from Singapore to get your tallow. You can build it locally and supply it locally. So there's opportunities.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay.
So next we've got a question from Denny. He's asking to Chris, what are the best candidate feedstocks for the huge increase in cost-effective sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, very good question, Denny, and good to see you, my friend. Yeah, so for the best candidate for feedstocks right now, in my slides, you probably saw that there's right now 6 commercial scale plants that are up and running, and 5 of them are coming from lipids, used cooking oil, French fry grease, beef tallow. That seems to be right now the best types of feedstocks because it's a little bit lower cost, and the pathway has been proven technology that's been around since I want to say probably 20 years now for those particular renewable fuels. which is a good thing. But we also know that there is a limit to the amount of used cooking oil. For lunch, I had some French fries, so I helped to add to the used cooking oil that we had out there. So eat more French fries and we'll be okay. Now, so yes, there is a limit to the used cooking oil that is out there across the board. But I'd say that is, number one, that's probably the best way to doing it right now. But I think that woody biomass is probably the next best thing, Denny. And that is, all those pine thinnings and then all the other biomass from corn stover and sugarcane bagasse, et cetera. But I think primarily one of the best feedstocks that we already know where it is, and that's municipal solid waste from a landfill. We know where all the landfills are. There's a landfill that's out in Reno, Nevada. Fulcrum is building a biorefinery where they're taking municipal solid waste, they're gasifying it, producing a syngas, and then taking it through the Fischer-Tropsch pathway process, FT, and they're turning that into jet fuel. It's actually in commission right now, so they're not actually producing just yet, but they're going to be getting there. And a lot of those big landfills are located in populous cities, so they're going to have a big airport as well too. So you'll be able to use that. The nice thing about the one in Reno, they can use it there in Reno, but it's also just 20, 30 miles from California. So they're going to be selling a lot of that into San Francisco and the Los Angeles airports as well too. But as I said, there's municipal solid waste everywhere. And so we're trying to back all the municipal solid waste types of companies. There's one called Reuse Waste, and they're going to be building one in Chicago, in that particular area. But we're trying to do what we can to promote the use of that across the board. So that is certainly a big candidate there, Denny, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Next we've got a question from June. I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, so first I want to thank all three of y'all, Cian, Chris, and Bill, for being here. This is awesome opportunity and great to see y'all again. My question would be, what are some advice from you guys for students who getting ready to graduate and want to get out there, who want to be part of bioeconomy? Like for me, I want to get more hand-on experience on converting biomass into bioproduct and be part of maybe extending my knowledge on that, as well as hand-on experience and being more like flexible on designing something like what Bill brought to the ABLC dinner that we had, something like that. So thank you.
Well, my first advice to you is join a group like Cable that helps you network with folks in the field and meet other people. All right, wait, that's a good one. Yeah, it does help to know folks. It really does help to network. If you send, cold resumes out to, by the time a job is listed and you send them out, it's a hard way to get a job. If you work with people and talk to people like us, it's a little easier. And even mentors and professors can help you also find leads. So use all your advantages to look for positions. So if you were to send your resume to us, we might then, almost like an exponential network, send it to the couple of companies we know that might be interested in someone like you if it's not USDA. So take advantage of your advantages, and Cable's one of them. You're going to add more, Chris, or others?
No, I definitely agree. Yes, I do have a huge network of people that I'm working with, and we are not. We are feedstock agnostic. We are pathway agnostic. We want everybody to win and succeed. So we're not trying to say, oh yeah, we really like this company, only do work with them. There's if there's a geographic limitation that you're only going to work in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, then yeah, we can put you in touch with the people up there. But if you're willing to travel anywhere, we can hook you up with a lot of different people across the board. I have mentored a lot of different people, some within the cable organization who, I first met Denny a long time ago, and some of the folks did reach out to me, and I certainly have helped them along the way as well too. So I don't mind continuing to do that, just like Bill was saying as well.
Thank you so much.
Chris, June is from Thailand.
Ah,
Am I right?
Okay.
Is it Thailand?
Yes.
So she can travel.
Yeah. So I just got back from Singapore. So if I made any fuzzy mistakes, it's like flipping the clock upside down. I just got back 2 days ago. So love that part of the world.
I don't know how I'm gonna feel when I fly back home with the mask regulation for a 17-hour-long flight.
so June, are you in Thailand now, or that's just where you're from originally?
That's where I'm from. Now I go to state in North Carolina, and I have not be able to like go back home yet with school and COVID and everything.
Yeah, no, I understand. So I know of a company that is trying to maybe open up a biorefinery in Kuala Lumpur, or I'm sorry, outside of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I know it's in that general neck of the woods as it is. I know it's just not right down the street from Thailand, but yeah, no, I know people in that general area of the world, and I'm also doing a lot of work with Australia. Some of my contacts that I met during the Great Green Fleet days is still making those connections, so I can put you in touch with somebody from Australia as well too.
That's awesome. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And if you're interested in biopolymers, you can write and we'd help, mentor you along either for the US. Thailand is really big in PHA plastics and some of the things I talked about. Surprisingly active in it.
Awesome.
Thank you all for coming. It's looking like it's getting close to time to wrap up, but we do have time for 1 or 2 more questions beforehand.
I guess I'll go. I have this quick question for Chris, because I've been keeping I'll give an introduction. I'm also studying bioresource engineering, and I'm in university right now. And I've seen some talk about electric propulsion for aircraft, and I don't know how much I buy into it, because I believe the batteries that would be required would just make it so unsustainable with regards to the mining, but also the weight of the batteries. So I'm still a big believer in SAF, of course, but I'm wondering how you kind of promote SAF as the more sustainable alternative when everyone's like thinking, ooh, electric is the future. Say, no, SAF is actually still better, because that's what I believe.
Very good, Gregory, and thank you for that question. That's awesome. I owe you $20. Just let me know what your address is, and I'll send you a check. You're exactly correct. If you were to put batteries on a huge plane and send it overseas, you wouldn't be able to put any passengers on it, because it's just weight limited. Now, there is electrification that they're talking about for regional jets, anything less than maybe 200 or 300 miles, and that's fine, but definitely not. I mean, with the current technology we have, until they can make batteries much lighter and all that. But right now, no, you're right. You can't do anything internationally, and you have to think too. International aviation, especially when you're talking about a country like New Zealand or Australia, the only way to get there is mainly by plane. Unless you're going to get on a big cruise ship and or a tanker, it's going to take you a long time to get there. But they certainly rely on international aviation quite a bit, across the board. So the other aspect of that too, Gregory, is that right now with sustainable aviation fuel, as I mentioned and Bill reiterated, it's a drop-in replacement. You don't have to change out any infrastructure. You don't have to mess with the engines. You don't have to mess with the fuel tanks, nothing. It's chemically the same. again, it's not coming from dead dinosaurs. It's coming from municipal solid waste and from used cooking oil. So the electrification, they're going to have to re-engineer a whole plane for that. And we all know that those kinds of things are very, very expensive. When you go to a car show and you see a concept car that's spinning around on a little turntable there, yeah, so it's handmade and it's going to cost $2 million to make. Well, once it gets to assembly line, sure, the price of that's going to come way down, $10,000 a copy or whatever. But that would be where the electrical planes are. They're all concept cars. They're all concept planes. And so until it gets to a mass-produced situation, maybe in 2050, but between now and then, we have to go ahead and use the sustainable aviation fuel because that is, again, a drop-in replacement and the pathways are there. It's proven technology, and we just have to make more of it, across the board as we were indicating. A good question, Gregory. Thanks.
Gotcha. Thank you for your answer, and thank you both for being here.